Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending Improving's July 24th virtual Lunch and Learn. Before we start, I want to inform you about a feature in the presentation that'll make the session more interactive. Please make note of the question mark icon at the upper right of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open the question and answer feature, which allows you to send the moderator questions to be delivered to our insightful presenter at the appropriate time. Speaking of insightful presenters, I am proud to present Marcus King, who is a Director of Consulting at Improving. Today, Marcus will be sharing part 2 of the two-part series titled Business-Minded Architecture, How to Architect Solutions with Business Objectives Front of Mind. Take it away, Marcus.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining me on this part 2 of a two-part series. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day and your lunch to listen to me speak about this topic that I happen to be very passionate about. My is not going to the next slide. My name is Marcus King, and I have been with Improving for about 6.5 years or so. I started out as a network and systems engineer, moved to Vegas in 2006 and got into software development from there. Really love what I do. I came back to Texas after that, joined Improving back in 2014, and I really love working with my clients, helping them develop solutions and develop an architecture that works for them within the confines of what they can afford. So part of this talk is going to be me reviewing what we went over last time in very, a much more quick fashion than I did. And then we'll kind of dive into the part 2 piece. So if you didn't join us last time, I will go over all that and get everybody up to speed with where we left off 2 weeks ago. So let's just kind of review and start here. If you recall, there's some questions you should really be asking yourself, right? The who, the what, the when, the where, the why, to what extent. And the reason we want to do this is just to check our own assumptions as we kind of step into an architectural design and review process and make sure that we're challenging our own assumptions before we go and talk to anybody else. This is going to help you set some context. It should help you become more aware of maybe some of the assumptions that you do have. You can research those assumptions. And then as you're in those conversations with the business and with other engineers, it will help you realize when those topics come up, and then you can start to dive deeper into them with other individuals. So once you've done that, the goal is to start having conversations around different areas, whether they're inputs or outputs into the system, as you recall, or quantitative versus qualitative concerns. And as you remember, we set this up where there's some things that go into the system, whether they're legal concerns, environmental concerns, security integrations, whatever the case may be. And it's a sliding scale where some of these also have more of an output than an input. So it's not a hard and fast rule. And then the quantitative versus qualitative, the quantitative being things we can actually measure. How much data am I going to be using in this system, right? How much storage capacity do I need? Performance. How quickly does my web page need to render to the client, right? To the browser. These are things we can measure. We can say whether or not we're successful. Versus the qualitative things, right? What does support look like? Who's going to be supporting this application? Who's going to be responsible for answering the phone at 2 a.m. and dealing with customer issues when they come up? And how would those get resolved when they actually do come up? So once you've done that, and you've had these conversations, and this is a great thing to do. If you recall, I took this and then we kind of developed a bit of a heat map, right? And what this lets you do is it lets you stack rank these items and these conversations and gives you a great visual representation about the level of importance for each one of these topics. This is a great artifact to have to take to other conversations When things do go out into the wild or conversations arise of, well, we have, a security issue that we really need to spend a few days on, but we also have some auditing things we need to deal with, and we think we're going to do auditing. You can go back and look at this heat map and challenge those assumptions and say, we really place security as something that's more important. And so let's go ahead and do that first, and then we might maybe get to the auditing stuff next. And so a question that came up, and I want to point out here, is it was asked of me afterwards, what tool set do I use to create this heat map? And again, if there's questions during this presentation, I please ask. Our moderator will interrupt me and I'll be happy to answer them. So if you have questions, chime away. But I did actually go off and I created a heat map. I hosted it on my GitHub. It's a simple Excel spreadsheet, should be really simple to use. And you can start using that if you'd like, but it is out there for individuals to have, because it was something that, it's an artifact you can take away from this and start to use in your daily practice. So once we've done this and we've created this heat map, the next stage of this was to kind of get to the whiteboard, right? And take some things into consideration. We talked about buy versus build, when it might be appropriate to throw in a third-party vendor solution that you want to integrate into versus building it yourself. If your business needs spreadsheets, no one's going to build it on their own. They're going to buy Microsoft Excel or use numbers out of Mac. So yeah, that's a great overly exaggerated example of buy versus build, but those things come up in any design. The other one is the on-prem versus cloud conversation. If you're a smaller startup, cloud usually makes more sense. If you're a larger company, sometimes you have your own data centers and you're bound by what you have in there, and you need to take that into consideration. So, it's not always just as cut and dry as you might like to think it is. I prefer cloud, obviously, but it's not always the right solution. We also reversed cost over complexity. And if you recall, I had a great little parabola and was kind of showing where you want to be in terms of your level of complexity in your system and what you're striving to do. And then the last one there was known technology versus kind of envelope pushing technology. And so, what do I mean by that? We want to kind of avoid resume driven development. Obviously, that's not something we really want to do. But we also want to know when we can push the envelope. Is it okay to pick up a front-end framework? Is now the time to actually, bite off learning React as a team? Is now the time to bite off MongoDB or some other non-RDBMS system? And do we want to pick that up and start, storing data there as opposed to a SQL database or a SQL type database? And again, all great conversations to have, things you should totally be talking to your team about as you're going through a whiteboard session or multiple whiteboard sessions as you come up with whatever design you may happen to land on. So once we do that and we're here, and this is kind of where I left off last time, is you have this good design. What do you do with it? You've taken the time to whiteboard everything. You've asked yourself questions. You've checked your own assumptions with the business. You've brought the business into fold. You've done a great job building trust around those conversations we showed earlier. And now what we really got to do is, figure out who we're pitching this to, right? Who's going to be my buyer, as it were. Somebody has to sign off on this. And then make sure that we are addressing those concerns. There's different factors you kind of have to take into mind. Whether or not you're talking to a team lead or a boardroom member, you need to understand what they want out of it, what they are looking for. And it's really important to remember during all of this that your company, if you're designing something, whether it's for your company or for a different company, more than likely it's addressing a business concern that they are hungering for. This is something that they want by and large. And so it's important to realize that they usually want to say yes to this. You just have to figure out how it is that you got to figure out how they're going to feel comfortable with it before they do. And these are some tips and tricks and some things that should help guide you through that process. So, first off, it's what kind of buyers do we have, right? We have everybody from team leads all the way to board members in some cases. And we're going to step through these, each one of these buyers in groups and kind of talk about what their concerns are in general and some things you should be aware of before you go and talk to individuals at any of these levels. A team lead's concerns are going to be vastly different than a CFO or a CTO even. And what is it things what kind of things can you address in general that will help placate any concerns they may have about your design? So here I have just kind of a simple one-dimensional technical versus business, line here, right? And what you really want to consider or concern yourself with is who is the person you're going to be pitching this to? What is it they're going to get out of this? And then, some other questions that might not be so obvious. Why would this person say no? If you were in their seat, if you were in their chair, what is it about this that would make them say, you know what, I changed my mind. I don't think we want to go in that direction. And it's really important that you understand who these people are. So if you've never had interactions with them, LinkedIn is a great way to go figure out what their background professionally looks like and figure out where their concerns might be. A long time ago, I had a director above me who had come up. He was a director of software development, but on his LinkedIn page, he had come up through the QA practice. He was really big into QA, automated QA, and this was 10 years ago. So this was before automated QA was even really a forefront thought in our space. But he was really big on unit testing and, how are we going to test this to make sure the quality is high? So when I would pitch him a design, I knew to bring up unit testing, any end-to-end testing we may want to do, or, just it really helped me guide the conversation in a way that he felt comfortable. To kind of contrast that, I've, pitched designs to C-suite executives where they didn't really necessarily care about the individual technology choices. I have a .NET background, so what NuGet packages I was using, that wasn't of consequence to them. They wanted to know what their return on initial investment would be, when they could start seeing a return, and what the timeline looked like, right? Because they had to go back to their investors and make sure that those concerns were addressed before they started writing checks for the design that I had pitched. So let's kind of start with our team leads and our managers, and what are they concerned with? I think it's important to realize that your technical managers, your team leads, they're going to be in the code almost on a daily basis, especially your team leads, and so they're really going to be concerned with, how are you going to do this without really, they want you to push the envelope, but they don't want you to rock the boat, right? You want to point out new technology. You want to point out how good your design is, but they may have some small concerns in there and in the bigger picture that you kind of want to stay above. You definitely want to acknowledge them, but you want to make sure that you communicate, you can address these. Get ready to rumble with these individuals over very technical concerns. Why would we use a new database when we could just stand up another table in SQL? Why would we want to move away from jQuery when everything is jQuery because it's an old system? Why would we want to introduce React now? Or why would we want to introduce Angular at this point in the design process? So understanding that is important. Your team lead is going to be a little bit less concerned about budget unless you're blowing it out of the water. So make sure that you kind of stay within that budget that's already set out. You're not pushing the envelope too far on that. And then same with your managers, right? They may not be in the code every day. They're not going to see it the same way a team lead would, but they are going to have support related technical concerns. You know, what happens if something breaks? How do I tell where it broke? And that goes back to some of those previous conversations we had in my last talk on the heat map. So, you know, budgets may be a concern here, but again, like the team lead, the budget's only going to be a concern if you're breaking that budget. So you want to speak lightly of costs. When talking to a manager, you definitely want to address it if it comes up, but you want to make sure that you're staying within those costs as you're having these conversations and as you're pitching your design. So next we have our directors and VPs, and I'm going to be honest with you, the directors and VPs are probably your hardest sells during this process. You know, your directors are not necessarily going to be in the code, maybe rarely, if at all. The larger the company, the less likely it is they've even seen a line of code or have looked at it in quite some time. The budget kind of stops there with those individuals. A lot of them are responsible for the expenditures that take place underneath them. They have some kind of P&L typically, and they need to profit loss. They need to show that they're being responsible with the money that's been allocated to their departments. You know, they're going to ask a lot of these individuals have come up through the software development or through the technical ranks, and so they understand the design you're putting forth. So they're going to have the same kind of design concerns that your manager or your team lead may have, but they're also going to have buy versus build concerns if budget is something that may come up. You may pitch something and they say, well, we have this great product we could go buy today that already does it, and I think it might be easier to just integrate that. You need to be able to speak to those concerns, especially at the VP level. It's really important that you address these concerns, because if you don't, since they're responsible for the budget, these are the first people that could say no. And you know what I have found is if a director or a VP says no, more than likely in medium-sized organizations, that CTO, CIO is going to be a little less apt to go for it as well on the recommendation of what that director or VP pitched. And so understanding that there's conversations after you walk out of the room, understanding that you know, it's knowing who your main buyer, who your main influencer is really going to help drive the way that you have these conversations with the directors, with the VPs, because they are going to have those technical concerns, right? They are going to have those business concerns as well. And so you really have to be able to get ready to directly identify and directly speak to any concerns they may have, because they will have concerns on both sides. So let's go ahead and move on to the CIO, CTO. Excuse me, needed some water. The classic difference between a CIO and CTO, and this isn't true of every organization. Your CTO normally has more of a technical background and is normally more involved in the overall architecture and the overall technology decisions that are being made from a technical aspect. Your CIO is typically somebody who's more of a business concern, is more focused on service contracts and the concerns of how the technology infrastructure a company has impacts the business. That's not always the case. I've seen this mixed, in multiple directions, but typically this will hold true. And this is, again, goes back to where going and looking up the background of some of these individuals on LinkedIn will really help you frame conversations for either of these positions. These individuals will want to know why technology is that you picked. They're going to want to know, again, why you decided to build something versus buy something. Especially at the C level, they're not used to being questioned as much. And so when they put something out there, You have to be very careful. A lot of yes ands instead of no buts go a long way. And these are normally the individuals who will sign off on whatever the design is that you've presented, even if it's presenting down to the team lead, even if it's presenting down to a manager. These designs and whether or not they get selected will bubble up to a C level or VP level before they actually get signed off and any CapEx gets distributed. So all concerns here will be scrutinized. It's super important that you address whatever business concerns they have. So let's kind of move on to the CEO, CFO, or investor. So I'm going to kind of collapse the CEO, CFO conversation here. They're going to basically want to know cost. They're going to want to know questions about staffing. They're going to have timeline concerns. This is your CFO. They're going to want to know about the kind of work you're doing, and it's not from a technical aspect. A lot of R&D in organizations can get written off, and they're going to want to know if this is something that they can write off at the end of a fiscal year as R&D work. And so to be really clear about the work you're doing and how you're doing it and where you plan on addressing some of your work goes a long way. So, you need to have really good answers. You need to understand that your CFO's going to scrutinize every dollar that goes through. So you need to be cost conscious because they're going to be extra cost conscious as well. And they really want to know when you plan on being done. I know as of the last couple years or years, a couple years, there's been a larger push to not pressure a development team to necessarily hit a certain date. I'm old school. As long as that's a conversation, I don't necessarily mind it. But you do need to be aware that when you're dealing with business-minded individuals, they are going to be date-driven because of they have return on investments and top line, bottom line, and auditing concerns that they have to address. And so they have to show their investors that they're spending money wisely that's been given to them. So your CEO and boardroom, it's a little bit different. They're going to want to know impact on top line or bottom line. The difference here is, your top line revenue, the overall money you're making versus bottom line, whatever expenditures you're putting forth just to kind of keep steady state is an oversimplified way of kind of explaining it. But you also have to realize that if you're talking about a feature or a design that's going to save somebody 5% on their bottom line, that might be less of a concern. If a sales VP is coming in behind you and saying, I have this great idea, and if we do this, I think it will net us 5 or 7% on our revenue, on our top line. Most business-minded people will go for the top line concern over bottom line concern in my history over conversations that I've had. I've even had a CEO tell me that before. So, to make sure that we empower their top line concerns, that we address those is really important in those kind of conversations. And again, your CEO, your boardroom, they want to know when you're going to be done. It's not to constrain you. It's not to put you in a corner. Normally it's because they're excited. Remember back to one of my initial slides of they are really excited about whatever it is we as a technical solution team are putting forth as a design, because we're meeting a business need. They want to get marketing on it. They want to get sales on it. They're super excited for when can they start pitching this? When can they start making money off of this and be profitable from it? So take those questions as a source of excitement and camaraderie, and try to help answer those questions to the best of your ability, while saying, things could shift and move as the process moves on. So if you remember from the heat map, this is more of a matrix that I've put together. And in fact, now that I'm looking at it, I can put this in the same heat map GitHub for everybody if you'd like afterwards. But these are some conversations that I like to have at each different level. and really make sure that as I'm doing the upfront work and even the pitch work, that I'm asking questions or I'm listening for topics in this area. A few things to note here. Notice at the director and VP level, every box is checked. If you're asking yourself why, it's because they're your toughest buyers. It's because they're going to have concerns on both sides of the house, and you've got to be prepared to not only address those topics even during the design process, or not after the design process, but as we're going through and solidifying, going and moving forth. You want to make sure that you address anything that comes up with these individuals. So be prepared for that. And then the other thing I kind of wanted to note, it might come through in the presentation, availability, integrations, and security. Availability is something that is super important to talk about at all levels. I've had conversations in the past where I was talking to a manager during this process, and as I was pitching to the manager said, I think we can take this stuff. Historically, we've taken stuff down between 2 and 4 a.m. So I don't see why we couldn't do the same with this new design to kind of do any maintenance we would need to do. So don't worry about that. 2 to 4 a.m. is just fine. I had a follow-on meeting with the executives a few days later. And when I said, hey, the availability for this will be from 2 to 4 a.m. or it won't be available from 2 to 4 a.m. for maintenance. Their COO eventually snapped back and said, it has to be available 24/7. We can't have this go down. That forced me into a bit of a different design even after the pitch. Moving forward, it didn't affect cost, but it did affect how we went about doing some things because we wanted to make sure we addressed that concern. And I had to go back to the team lead and clarify that expectation that we can't take this stuff down between 2 and 4 a.m. It's just not an option moving forward with the work we plan on doing. Next up is the integrations work. Integrations are super important as well because a team lead might think, or a director might even think, we're going to integrate with product A over here. And I've seen where personal relationships and the executive staff have influenced which vendor you might go with, which payment gateway you might want to decide on using because of personal and professional relationships that are historical within that organization that push that decision in one direction or another. So as you pitch this and you do have, I think we're going to go with company A, be prepared to get pushed back on as you're pitching this to say, we could also do B, and I've looked at B, and we think there's similar feature sets here, and so we're fine to go either way. It doesn't affect the design. It doesn't affect the expenditures we're going to be spending. It only affects who we're actually connecting to at the end of the day. And then the last one is security. And I bring this up because your CEO, your CFO, your COO, their concerns around security are going to be more of who has access to this. Your legal office may want to know who has access, who can read these documents or whatever it is you're working on. Whereas your team lead might just think, oh, we're just going to be doing what we've always done. So it's really important to have that conversation, not necessarily, with your team lead, you may want to discuss, single sign-on, or we're going to be using identity server, and that's great. But at the C-suite level, that conversation changes just a little bit because you're really more concerned with the implications of what that security is. So as you're pitching, be sure that you address that. We're going to have an administrative portion of the website where your support staff can get in and make changes to somebody's purchases or somebody's deliveries on any items they may have bought on the e-commerce platform, as an example. So once you've kind of gone through this and you've addressed all these concerns, you need to make sure that you stop and that you are asking questions even during the pitch. he who asks a question is a fool for 5 minutes. He who does not ask a question remains a fool forever. As you're pitching, have a notebook with you. Take egregious notes. Make sure that you understand the concerns that were brought up, even as you did your pitch, because it will help you be a better presenter moving forward. And then make sure that you're asking questions. This is the design I have for it. This was the assumption that we've talked about in advance. This is what I came up with. Are there still concerns in this area? It's okay to alter your design afterwards. It's okay to go back and say, I think we need to go with a different route than we had initially intended, and here's why. But it's not okay to do that and not have those conversations. So, to also check yourself and to check your assumptions even as you go in and pitch is super important. It will help build trust as you go through the build process as well. So, the other thing we want to do here, and this is something that I do, is I love to use visuals as I'm pitching. I will go to marketing, I will go to sales, I will try to get graphs that they have showing certain aspects. So here's 3 things that I've used in the past, and I'll speak to each one real quick. So the diagram here that looks like a block diagram is just that. It's a simple dependency diagram that shows these systems are related to each other, top to bottom, but left to right, there's no relation. So this is something you could put in front of a business person and say, this is kind of the dependencies we thought we would have. So, my store and my orders need to know about inventory, which needs to know about warehouse management and purchasing. There's going to be an ERP system that feeds all this information on up. A CEO or a COO, CFO, they'll understand this. They might not understand the implications from a technical aspect, but they'll understand what it means that, oh, so I have to have, inventory in place to make sure that my store can see it, right? Whereas if you hand this over to a technical person, they understand that as you're building the purchasing aspect of your design, that it can't know or it can't bring in anything about warehouse management into it, or else you violated the design that you've put forth. Single responsibility principle, but at a much bigger level than just the application or a class or an object level down within just application architecture. Next, we have market share. I like to kind of show this sometimes, whereas maybe we're the blue over here. We have 19% market share, but we think after we're done, this will push the envelope and give us 28% market share. I pick a number. The point is that it kind of shows a great picture of where we're at today, and then once the design is out there, where do we think we'll be tomorrow? And then the last one is kind of just showing, and I grabbed something off off Google here, but it just kind of shows revenue over time, where we think MVP will be delivered, and then once MVP gets delivered, we start making some money, and then we kind of iterate on it and we go to the minimum marketable product. And once 1.0 is released, look at how much our revenue is going to increase. And I've talked to sales, I've talked to marketing, and they really think that once we've hit these dates, and they think that once these features are out there, they can capitalize on this in a way that we're really going to see revenue shoot up, especially after 1.0 has been released. These are super powerful slides to have at director level and up. Especially if you're pitching at a C-suite level, they're really going to enjoy seeing that you've taken these thoughts into consideration. You've taken these aspects of the business into consideration in your design, and that you've thought about how your design is going to impact the business moving forward. So kind of the last thing we want to do here is, we want to make sure that, we're listening intently. These are just some other useful tips, and I was having a conversation with somebody. I said, in the age of everything being virtual, I noticed as I was on these virtual conversations, I noticed I tilt my head like this, and it's really frustrating to me. I'm trying to make sure I don't do that as I'm listening to others virtually, because I think it comes across weird on video. And he said back to me, it's actually body language showing that you're listening. I don't know if I would stop doing that. It shows that you're acutely aware of the individual talking to you, and you need to make sure you don't sweat the small stuff. And so I've continued to do it, although I do catch myself sometimes still looking and propping my head forward. But you want to listen intently, and these days where we are really virtual, it's okay to give off body language cues like that. You want to mimic body language. If somebody seems frustrated, you want to counteract that frustration as you're pitching and say, hey, I think I've noticed some frustration. How can we how can we address that? Is there something I'm not addressing that will make this situation better? Take notes. If somebody's talking and you're writing down as they're talking, it will make them feel listened to, and it will help you capture whatever it is they're discussing. So when you go back and review these notes, you will have a good chance of really taking their concerns and making sure that you address them as you go through in your build out process. And then the other thing that I like to do, and there's others that I work with that like to do this, use metaphors that relate. If you're at a healthcare company and you're pitching a design and you need a good metaphor to use a metaphor in the medical field. Use something that is doctor-patient related or health insurance patient related, where everybody in the room will kind of understand what you're talking about. Maybe not the best time to throw out a construction metaphor or a car metaphor. And while they may understand it, they're not going to understand it as well if you had picked a metaphor that matched within whatever vertical it is you happen to be pitching in. So once we've gone over all this stuff, you got to ask yourself, did I sell this? We said you want to take notes, and the reason why is because you want to review those notes afterwards. When I have a pitch like this, and I've pitched to multiple levels within an organization, I will generally go back out and I will journal exactly kind of what happened, usually within the same business day that I did the pitch, even if it's at night. I really want to capture my thoughts and my feelings during that and make sure that I'm aware of them. I want to know what went well, what didn't go well, so I can iterate on this. So the next time I do this, whether it's for this client or a different client, I can adjust my my pitch in a way that somebody will be more amenable to it. I want to make sure that I'm elevating. I want to make sure that I'm elevating the others in the room, that I'm elevating their concerns, and that I've listened to them and that I'm addressing them. The interesting part about pitching designs and making sure people buy into whatever architecture it is you have out there is you have a group of people that are saying yes to this, and they don't always fully understand what they're necessarily buying. They know they want it, right? Back to the original conversation when we first started this. They do know they want it, but they don't fully understand it. They are putting their trust in you that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, and that the design will come out and be something that they can use and extend from a business perspective. They can build a feature into 2 or 3 more features that are built on top of the initial feature that allow them to expand their business into different areas and capture more market. And so it's really important that you listen to them and that you are capturing everything that came out of these design pitch or these design sessions as you pitch it, and that you refine your message as you go through with each subsequent pitch that you do, whether it's for the same company or a different company. Anyway, that's about all I have for this session. If anybody has any questions, I would love to address them. And thank you so much.
How would you communicate to leadership that you want to be included in meetings like this as an observer so you'll be able to participate in them in the future?
And that's a great question. So as a consultant, and I don't know if the question is being asked as a full-time employee for the company you work for or as a consultant. As a consultant, I tend to be very direct. And so if I need to be a part of that conversation, especially when I hit the ground at a company, I will just say, hey, you brought me on board to have, to introduce a new design or a new architecture. I need to be a part, or I would love to be a part of, a meeting that the marketing department is having for some of the sales objectives that are coming up over the course of the next year, so I can kind of understand what their expectations are moving forward. I don't want to design something that's not going to meet their expectations. And then I just start to try to build out those relationships that way. Before I became a consultant and I was full-time, I would just kind of ask. I find that if you don't ask, the answer is always going to be no. And if you do ask, at least you're voicing your concerns. And at least you can say, this is why I'd like to be a part of it. And if you're not able to be there, hopefully whoever you ask, if it's your director or your VP, you can impress upon them how important it is some of these questions get asked to make sure that you have the best design so they can make sure they get the answer they need. When you make your boss look good, you look good, kind of thing. Anything else?
That was the last one.
Okay.
Thank you all for attending today's virtual Lunch and Learn. And Marcus, thank you for sharing business-minded architecture, how to architect solutions with business objectives front of mind. The recording of this session will be available the next business day. To view the recording, locate the session from Improving's virtual events page. And while you're at the virtual events page, be sure to register for future Lunch and Learn sessions.